Hey, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started with today's program. Thank you for everyone that participated in our poll. I'm going to go ahead and end that. This was our pop quiz about what is the most translated document in the world. I'm going to share our results, so you should see that come up on your screen. We had some really great guesses out there and some really good competing possibilities. The correct answer is actually the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is translated into more than 550 languages. The Bible is one of the most translated books, so that gets the most translated book along with the Quran. But yes, the actual document would be the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Thanks for participating. So welcome everyone to today's program. My name is Shana Pughe Dean. I am the Manager of Translation and Training at the Center. I've been with the Center for 15 plus years in a variety of roles, mainly working with language service, managing interpreters, and now managing translation for the last almost 8 years. I do have translation coordinator Gigi Min joining us. Today's program is brought by and helped organized by the Office for New Americans Immigrant Community Navigator program at the center that provides programming for our clients and also for you, the community. So Manar, the program coordinator, is with us. Manar, did you want to say anything today?
I loved the questionnaire at the beginning. It was so fun. Thank you so much,
Really?
Shana, for accepting to do that, and good luck today. And I can't wait to see how your presentation will go. I'm sure it will be very productive and exciting.
Well, thank you so much, Manar, and thank you for this opportunity. Some of you may have heard some of what you're going to see today in August when we were invited to participate in the Navigator Roundtable. So some of the same things will be mentioned, but we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive. This training is for you, and so please ask any questions you might have related to translation, language, and the process. So who is tone? I think this is a great place to answer this question. It is a little confusing in the Utica and Mohawk Valley region because we are a part of the center. We are the translation department at the center, but we are branded separately. Similar to our Compass Interpreters division, we have a different name. Some of the reasons for this is several years ago, about 8 to 9, we decided that we needed to have dedicated departments for translation and interpreting so that we could professionalize those services farther and really focus on providing better service to the community. Interpretation was already doing fairly well, but the written document work of translations needed some more support. And so we were able to separate those two departments and have them managed separately. It's allowed Tone to have a global team. So we have translators working on 5 different continents. But of course, our heart remains local. We are built from the center's history of 40 years. We are built out of the work of resettling refugees, and we continue to employ former refugees and anyone that comes through with language skills as an immigrant or somebody who may have gotten educated in the United States for translation services. And we're working in all the critical languages needed by refugee and new immigrant communities. We're more than just translation. So most of you may use us for document translation, but we have done other work. Most of our other work has been in voice recording and narration. So we have done a lot of voice recording work for our traffic safety program at the center. And you can see some of that work on our website under multilingual resources. We actually this past year had the wonderful opportunity to work with USA Today and actually do a voiceover for one of their stories about wages in Spanish. And we've done other voice recording work for one of our partners outside of the Utica area, the Second Language Acquisition Lab, to provide instructions for testing. So we can provide the transcripts for videos and then do the voiceover work for that. We also do a large amount of cultural consulting for our Second Language Acquisition Lab friends and providing reviews of different documents and tests for cultural appropriateness to make sure that examples about food are correct for the target language and the target audience. Terms and definitions you'll hear a lot today. So source language, if I use this term, it means the language you translate or interpret from. So often our source language is English. That's our most common source language. For our individual documents, it varies. So we do both organizational work in terms of your brochures, pamphlets, things like that, flyers, human resource information. We also do a large amount of personal document translation for individuals that need their birth certificates translated, marriage certificates, or school diplomas done. And that source language can vary. The target language is the language you are translating or interpreting into. So some of our most common target languages are Burmese, Karen, Spanish, Arabic, Bosnian. Interpretation is spoken or sign language, and that's really important. So in English, and generally I've heard it in a lot of reporting by journalists as well, the terms interpretation and translation are used very fluidly and intermixed. But in the industry, it's very clear, and there's a clear definition and distinction between the two. Interpreting is for spoken language support. Translation is for written language support. So that's very important for you as a service provider to understand those two differences. An LLD is a language of limited diffusion. That's a lesser spoken language, and that's the most a kind way of saying a language isn't as widely spoken. It's a language of lesser diffusion because in some places, Spanish might actually be a language of lesser diffusion in a country like the Sudan because it's not widely spoken. So it also depends on geography. And LEP is a limited English proficient individual, or you can use the term non-native English speaker or English language learner. 1 in 4 people in the city limits of Utica speak a language other than English at home. So that's why understanding these terms and understanding language support is very important to the work that you're doing. Many of you have seen this slide before, especially if you have attended any of my cultural trainings. I'm curious to know if there's anybody out there, you can maybe put it in the chat box. If there's anybody that thinks they can name at least 5 languages up here. Is there anybody that confident that can name at least 5 languages? We have a quiet group this afternoon, so that's okay. I will go through some of these. Most of what you see up here fall into our top 10 languages spoken in the area. So we have Spanish, very commonly spoken. We have Bosnian, very commonly spoken in Utica. Karen, Burmese, Arabic, Farsi, Vietnamese, Russian. I apologize, I don't have Ukrainian on here. Somali. I think my boxes are covering up Swahili up here. Oh, Manar said she can try. I'm sorry, I started giving people answers before I saw your chat come in. So I'm sure you could have definitely tried on that one, and I should have given you that opportunity. If anyone attended the World Refugee Day celebration in Utica, we actually had this poster, and you had the opportunity to quiz yourself. So there are some important points I'd like to make when I use this slide and when it comes to understanding languages in our region. One of those is that not assume that a country name equals the language name equals the ethnic group. This is really important because we live in the United States, for example, we don't speak American, we speak English. So we cannot just assume if somebody is from Burma, they speak Burmese. Or if they're from Sudan, Sudanese. Sudan has hundreds of languages. Of course, there are 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 that are very commonly spoken, but still it's really important to have that distinction. So don't just assume they're all the same. As already mentioned, knowing the difference between interpreting and translation is extremely important for assisting refugees, immigrants, and other non-native English speakers. Written language might not be the same preference as spoken language for individuals. For example, we have a large Somali Bantu community in the Utica and Mohawk Valley. A lot of them did not have home language education in Mai, which is their preferred spoken language. When they ask for documents, they might surprise you and ask for Somali, Swahili, or actually the English, depending on where they may have received some education and where they had some literacy. So it's very important that you have distinctions between those two language preferences. They may not be the same. So what languages? I think this is a really big question that we get the most from our community partners in the Utica area. Very often, I'm answering this question on probably a bi-weekly basis. Individuals and organizations want to know, what are the most spoken languages in Utica? What are the most spoken languages in the county? What should I be translating my documents into? That really can depend on who your target audience is. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. You have to think about the purpose of your document. Who are you trying to reach with your document? And do you have data to answer this question? So we really encourage our employers as well as the health facilities to be keeping some data on the language preferences of your employees and of your consumers. So your employee base, their language needs may not be the same as your consumer base or your customer base. Those could be two different language sets. So you really have to think about the purpose of why you're getting a document translated and how that's going to help you reach an end goal, or how it's going to help you inform the community and provide that language access. So really think about that. If you're considering, if you're an organization that's not doing translations for your employees. So I know we have some people joining us that frequently have stuff translated for their employee base, which is awesome. And they have a different language set. And they then decided they're going to only translate in the top 5 or the top 10. And sometimes a different department is requesting a different language set. These are all things to think about within your organization. But if you're thinking about having something done as a poster or a flyer that's for outside of your organization, for the community, the language groups for the city or the county are not the same as the language groups who are new refugee arrivals. And really, if you only want to do 4, 5, or 6 languages, you will have to make that choice and that decision. The top languages in Utica tend to be, and I say tend to be because our census does not completely catch all of these, because of how the census looks at language groups and language pairs. They're asking for Indo-European languages or an Asian language. It's like the ethnic groups that you answer on the census. So it's really hard to get this granular data. From what we know and can estimate our best guess, Bosnian, Spanish, Burmese, Karen, and Russian are about your top 5. If you want to get into the top 10, you're going to start including Arabic, Vietnamese, Somali, Swahili, and Ukrainian. If you look at the list on the other side of our screen, you can see that languages spoken by new arrivals are different in the last 2 to 3 years. Some of them do match and some of them do not. So you can see Ukrainian, Russian, Burmese, Pashto, and Dari would not make it into our top 10 for the city of Utica, would be in the top 5 for new arrivals in the last 3 years. Karen, Rohingya. Now, if you are working in the city of Utica, there is a large Rohingya speaking community. Most Rohingya cannot read the language, and there is still an ongoing standardization of that language. There is very limited education in Rohingya, so very few people read it. And we do have some recordings in Rohingya, it's the best way to communicate information to that community is having spoken language support. Kinyarwanda would not be in your top 10 languages spoken in the city, would be in the top 10 or top 8 of languages spoken by new arrivals. I'm going to again make this point that we also have a large Sudanese population. There are several Sudanese dialects and languages that require spoken language support from our Compass Interpreters Department because they do not have written forms. So we are working in written forms for tone. In that community, Juba Arabic is the Arabic language that is spoken, and they would ask for a Juba Arabic interpreter. But if they want written language support, they're going to be asking for Arabic because they would have learned standard Arabic. So I hope this helps with some of you with that question, and I can definitely answer any other questions you might have regarding different languages in the Mohawk Valley. Are there any questions right now before I move on? Okay. So what to consider if you need something translated? You really need to consider what is the purpose of your document. Oh, we do have a hand raised. Okay, so before I go on, Lisanne, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, thanks. So I run a traffic safety program here at this center, and when I work with new arrivals, or if your goal is to reach people who are new arrivals who really need to learn like the basics, those are languages that, in my humble opinion, should be included. Because if you're talking about public safety or you're talking about other things that people just don't know, then including the new arrival languages are really important. And sometimes we see a lot of new arrivals all at once, you know. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Lisanne. That's an extremely important point she made, that sometimes we are seeing bunches of arrivals of the same language group or varying ones at one time. So we're not getting into refugee arrivals in today's presentation and training. And I can certainly provide anybody with more answers to questions about that. But we have seen in the last year high arrivals. We're seeing a very good mix of arrivals from a large number of different language groups. And so if you know that you already have Bosnians working for you and Vietnamese, and your outreach to Korean and Burmese is pretty good because they're using your service, you might think about, how can I reach those communities that have just come and they don't really know Utica yet, they don't know what I'm providing. And so Lisanne's point is that you really need to think of that other list that we had up there. So it really does come down to what is the purpose of your document? What's the reason for you translating it? And who is your target audience? So you may be translating for employees within your organization, and that's your target audience. So your language subset's going to be different. What you want translated might be different based on that. And I really tell people, think about your English document. So you made this handout, this flyer. Why? What were you hoping to accomplish? And then you have to think about, that's pretty much the same for the other groups you're trying to reach, but are there any modifiers I need to think about here? Or are we being inclusive enough? Are we really reaching everybody that we can? And how can we reach individuals better? How can we engage our employee base better? How can we engage our consumers more? Because we're not seeing, I know maybe you're sitting there thinking, I know that the Korean community is very large in Utica, but we are not seeing them use our service. Why not? What could you do differently? Another very important thing you have to think about, so if you're preparing a document for translation, this is extremely important, and I'll have some examples in a few slides. Space. Do not crowd out your flyer. Do not give us a one page of wall-to-wall text and ask for it to still be one page when you translate it into Russian. If you want it still to be one page, the font could be 2 to 4 to 6 times smaller than the English font size because the characters take more space. So if you have the ability to construct a document from the beginning, like you're creating a brand new document for your organization, really think about leaving enough space. Obviously, you don't want it to look strange in the English version, but giving yourself enough room so that if you are going to have that translated, you'll have enough space and be able to maintain font size. And that's important because you have people from some of the communities, just like we do in English speaking or English reading communities, that don't have great eyesight. And they might actually have less access to getting prescription lenses or things to help their vision. So it is important to consider the font size and considering that we could keep it the same as the English if you have it large, because other languages, including Spanish, Russian, Burmese, Korean, can take 15 to 20% more space and 2 or 3 more sentences than the English version. Consider how you're communicating with the English reader. I think I already mentioned that. And are there any sayings in the document you have that might need to be explained? Obviously, we're using professional translators. They are used to seeing idioms, phrases of speech, special terminology. However, it still could be important if you're thinking about having something translated to look through and think about the look and feel. Or you're going to get a question from us, your translation management team, asking you, can we keep this tagline? Is it okay to translate this tagline? This seems to be the name of the event. Can we just leave it in English, or how do you want us to deal with it? Do you need the same document for non-native English reader? So this can be in the context of any of your human resource material or your training material for new employees, because it might be very dense for some of the languages we work with, especially because there are varying literacy levels, varying education levels in some of our communities. So even if they can read their home language, the register or the level of English might be a little too high. So you may consider making a plainer English form, or just going through your documents and deciding what are the most important pieces of information you want to make sure everybody is following and understands. Signature pages, I highly recommend having translated, because if somebody is signing something and they cannot read it, then you can't expect them to really follow it unless you've provided maybe spoken language support at that occasion. Does your document have infographics or other images with uneditable text? So sometimes we get documents, they have these really great little graphs, or, you know, those little pictures that have like a process, but we can't edit the text. And so we'll want to know, do you actually want the text translated? If that's true, we have to take that into account when we provide our quotes. Or maybe you just want it left in English, but we will come back to you with questions if we find that. So one thing you can consider if you're going to do a translation is maybe putting text boxes in advance, or looking through a document and seeing where you're going to see some of these issues prior to translation. Consider your timeline. If you have a large amount of information you want done, if you want it done well and you want to really give the translators the time to focus on the review and the translation, of course we can do things in a rush. We have done that many times and we can get it done. But depending on the information you're communicating, you definitely want to consider it can take, especially if your document gets over 500 words, you're going to want to give yourself, you know, at least a week or more to get those translations back. We can do it faster. Yes, we can. But especially, you know, if you're only requesting one language, sure. But if you're requesting maybe 5, 6, 7, give yourself some time. Think about that timeline if your documents are longer. Is the English document final? So please send us the final English document. Make sure you spell checked your English document. We often do have our translators come back and correct English for us with documents or say this didn't sound quite right. The other point I want to make, if you're thinking about simplifying your English documents, it doesn't mean broken English, because that can be harder to translate. So it still means, completing your sentences or your thoughts or your bullet point, not just leaving things out, but you can make it more simple. You can take out prepositions like is, that, for, the. You might not need all of the extra ways of explaining something. And are you working in a design program? So if you are working in design programs, you will have us ask you for the packaged file most of the time. So if you're working in design or Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator, why do we ask for a packaged file? The reason we ask for this is, one, converting PDF files are hard. And when they're from design programs, we really cannot make them look like they do, like the English version looks. So if you want your translated document should appear as well as it can within the context of the language, like the English document. So if you're working in a design program, we want the file so we can work directly in the InDesign program or the other design program, because we know the different languages. I actually have had to download the Middle Eastern version of InDesign because the English version doesn't have the ability to correctly do bullet points and other things from right to left. Which brings me to right to left languages. So it's very important to understand some things when you're working with these languages or you're thinking about having documents translated for them. Before, we used to really only work in Arabic, but we've welcomed our Afghan community here in the Utica area the last 2 to 3 years, and they're speaking Dari and Pashto and writing in Dari and Pashto. So we are doing right to left languages on a regular basis. It's important to think about images and graphics. If you're going to optimize something for a right to left language, the image and graphics should be moved to the other side of the page. Charts should be flipped. So I will bring up an example. I'll exit my PowerPoint and bring up an example for everybody. So if you have, say you're working in Word and you create a chart, you don't have to worry about flipping it for us. We have a great translation tool that helps us with that. And Microsoft has been actually pretty good, even with Excel. You can flip your worksheets and everything so that they work well. But booklets, if you're going to print a booklet, you have to be aware that the binding is going to be on the opposite side. And so we help you with that. We're here as your partner to help you with that. But it's also important for you to know so that when you get them printed and you get them back, you understand it's the correct way or that it's getting printed the correct way. So I'm going to jump out of my PowerPoint real quick. I'm going to stop share because I want to show you an example of, where is my, okay, wait just a second. Okay. So you should see, I'm hoping you see now a document that's about COVID-19. And this is an example of, here's the English version, and you can see it had these boxes here, and it had these boxes here. So that formatting, when we were working in Arabic, we had to make sure we flipped it. So you'll notice the English version, the orange box, it's on one side, and then the Arabic version, it's on the opposite side, and it should be. Obviously, you can translate all the words and they can be accurate, but if you really want it to appeal to your target audience and look and feel natural to them, you want to be making these changes and making sure that we're working with you to optimize your translation. And then this is another example of information about COVID. I'm sharing these because they were done by our internal programs, so it's easy to show them. I'm not showing customers' work. And then you can see it here in, this was Ashto, you can see we have moved everything to the other side. So this is, and the chart is flipped as well from the English version. And then you can also see an example here of where font doesn't on the computer screen appear that much smaller. But the Karen version had to be, pretty small. And this was a PDF that we actually had to convert because they didn't have the original file. And formatting in the Karen took 3 to 4 times longer than it would for a Spanish document because there was so much hidden formatting there. Any questions about that before I move on? No questions? Okay, so I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint for you guys now. Oh. Sorry about that. Here we go. Some other factors to consider that, again, we are here as your translation partner, so you don't have to worry about these quite as much, and we'll help you out. But I've already mentioned technical registers, level of vocabulary, descriptions of time, place, and gender. These are cultural factors that come into play. Pronoun usage, and as I already mentioned, linguistic preference. Gigi, I think you're with us today, right? I don't know. So when Gigi
Yes,
hops
I'm
on,
here.
okay. So can you tell us that example you have about the he, him? Can you tell our participants about that? And this is an example of pronoun usage. So Gigi's going to tell you a story of a translation she had to do.
Yeah, I think last 4 or 5 years ago, I did one of the court procedure translation. And if I read everything, then I understand that what should I do the translation. But it said a lot of he, his. And one sentence that is said, he hit him. So who is he and who is him? And it's very confused. But very beginning that it said, the father hit the son, the father abused to the son. So we already know about that. But in our language, we don't say that he hit him. So we should say that the father hit the son. So we cannot translate like very accurate what the English said. He hit him. It's very funny to translate it in our language. So you have to use it that the father or the son, or the father hit the son, or something like the name that you use it. For example, like John hit to Johnson or something like that. So it's translation. I mean, but when we do the translation, we have to adjust it, in appropriate who read this translation for who. So for the Burmese people, then we have to do the very adjusting the translation. So when I do that translation, I just very headache, and how actually, translation means very accurate. You have to do it. But in our language, we don't use those kind of things. And another example is, for example, like I'm waiting for my daughter. For example, my daughter is coming back from somewhere. So, and my husband asking me that, what are you doing? And I'm saying that I'm waiting for my daughter. And sometimes, not most of the time, we said that he and she also very confused for us, because we don't say that she all the time. We always use, in Burmese we said tu. It means someone. So for example, like I'm waiting for my daughter, then my husband asking me, what are you doing? And I said, I'm waiting for my daughter. And I said tu It's not coming, not she. So that too is she or he, but we use in English, then that is he only. So most of the time we use he for she and he for both female and male. So it's kind of a good example, then you should know, I think.
Thank you so much, Gigi. I learn something every time I hear Gigi speak. That's why I always invite her to come on my trainings whenever she can, because I learn something new all the time. And I know I didn't have the exact examples up on screen that she used, but they were so perfect. So the first example was talking about pronoun usage and that paragraph. And other languages, they have to qualify statements. So they have to use more accurately, not just he, him. They have to actually say the subject and not just use the pronoun. Or in this other case, she's saying they have this more, I don't know if you want to call it really gender neutral pronoun, but this more universal pronoun that is used. And it brought up another point that I'm really surprised I forgot to put on the other slide is when it comes to translation, the purpose of the translator is to provide the meaning of the text and be able to translate that meaning, that feeling from one document to another. It should not be word for word. It should be accurate and complete. But if something is word for word, it might not actually have the meaning, the same meaning. And so you can see this actually in literary translation. If you think about how many translations there are of Dostoevsky novels and you read them, they're not the same. And then we can get reviewers and translators sometimes arguing because they're not agreeing. Some languages are more flexible, where you can have things multiple ways, some are not. But that's the other important thing, because we have had customers in the past sometimes use something called back translation, where they will request that the translated item that's already been translated from the target text of English into, the source text of English into the target text of, say, Spanish, that it's then translated from Spanish back into English. You're going to see that the English side by side isn't going to be exact unless it's, a poster about who, what, when, where, because they're translating the meaning and the feeling. Thank you, Gigi, so much. Any questions before I move on to what I know several people are interested in hearing about is can they use Google Translate? So can you use Google Translate? I love translation technology. I think that, and I think technology is very cool. And another world I would have been in the tech world, I think, but I couldn't be a programmer. I don't have that kind of concentration per se. But language and technology have always been intermixed. Actually, if you think about computer programming and what courses people take, they're really other languages. Computer programming's another language, and programmers are learning multiple languages. And if they don't keep up, they, just like a translator, they start to lose the knowledge about that language or what the most frequently used programming language is now. But where we really get Google Translate and other machine translation supports coming into play is when they start using, and you may hear this term a lot now because of ChatGPT, large language models, which have basically learned from all the data that's available out there in the world, mostly the internet. In Google's case, they did feed their model other information. They actually worked in a neural machine network first. And there's, I can send you articles about this. So I will send out the PowerPoint to those who registered, and I'll also send out links to different resources. And there's a great article. It's a little old, but it's about how Google Translate came to be. And it's fascinating. I mean, this technology is so incredible, but you cannot get rid of humans. And I've heard a lot of tech people talk about how all these things, these tools can translate, and then they say translators are going to go out of fashion. And I hear somebody who's so intelligent and knows so much that I don't, but they don't know the language industry and they don't know translation if they're making that statement. And the reason for that is here, this graph, which came from an Intento 2022 study they did of over 33 language models that are out there. So believe it or not, most of us in the US just say Google Translate and it means we're using a translation tool. But there's actually DeepL out of Germany is actually more accurate in a couple language pairs. It's from Germany, so guess what? They are more accurate than Google Translate for German. And they're more accurate than Google Translate for, I believe, French and Italian, not by a high margin, but by a small margin. They also looked at the accuracy of Amazon and Microsoft, which has some really good built-in machine translation tools. But you can see down here, there's all of these other tools that are out there in the world that are doing automated translation work. So if you think, can I use Google Translate? Well, it depends on what language pair. So it comes back again to language pair matters. And remember, we're working in a lot of languages of limited diffusion, some that are more widely spoken like Spanish and maybe Russian. But there was a study done, I think back in 2016, and then an updated one done just a couple years ago by the UCLA Medical Center, which focused on medical terminology. They found that overall Google Translate accurately conveyed the meaning of about 82.5% of instructions, but the accuracy rate varied from 55 to 94% depending on the language pair. And again, this was specific to a language subset terminology. It was specific to health language. So when you give a machine very specific language and you give it a very widely spoken language, so there's a lot of Spanish data out in the world for these machines to learn, they're pretty accurate. But you can see the accuracy levels can drop very quickly. And so we're working on languages like Somali, Burmese. Karen isn't even available on Google Translate. Kinyarwanda's not available on Google Translate. So it really does depend what, again, your goal is. If you go back to those first few slides I used, Google is a very, very helpful tool. And I also encourage you to use DeepL. If you are working with European languages that are widely spoken, Spanish, French, Italian, and you need just an assistance, right? Or a glossary. Lingui or DeepL's glossary is fantastic. If you're looking up terminology, if you yourself are a translator, it's really great for those European highly spoken languages. So you can use it to help with low visibility, low importance information. When you start putting in or everyday phrases, you're trying to communicate something more simply or simple instructions, or you're just trying to get by because you don't have the interpreter that day, or you have a student in your class, language pair matters, but you can get away with some phrases and more widely used language pairs. Do not rely on Google Translate or other machine translation and AI for high visibility, high importance material. These are your human resource items. These are your notes home to parents. These are, your billboards, your flyers you're going to be putting out. Languages of limited diffusion. You can see it's only accurate for Armenian at 55%. We are working with languages where the accuracy rate would be much lower. Sure, you put in days of the week, you put in good morning, how are you, hello. It does great because that data exists in the world for that machine to grab and eat and reuse. But for other complicated sentences, it's not so great. Idioms and phrases of speech, it's going to get wrong. Literature, again, think about how complex literary work is. That's why there's a whole subset of translation for that. And again, specific terminology. So it can do really great with some specific terminology for some language pairs and not so great for others. There's a whole field that has emerged for translators at this point called post-machine editing. So we are still using humans, but they are taking a machine translation and they are editing it. They are making the machine translation better. They're doing a review of it. And that is the purpose of a reviewer, is to actually increase the accuracy and the how good the translation is. So questions about Google Translate? So don't worry, the translator's job isn't going anywhere. If anything, language experts are increasing, but maybe their tasks are just changing a little bit. Lisanne, you have your hand raised again. Please chime in.
I do. So it's not really about Google Translate, but it is about if your computer isn't, if you have a specific language group. I found maybe 10 years ago when I first started doing this work, maybe 10 years ago when I first started doing this work, I would print something out and I'm like, oh, great, I got this beautiful translation. And I would take it to one of the other staff members and they would say, what is that? The language was not their language. It was the computer and the printer weren't communicating the correct stuff. They were just, it was in English fonts and that wasn't correct. So that's tricky sometimes. That's why we have Shana and Gigi.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. I didn't put that really in today because it's not really an issue unless, like Lisanne, you've been translating documents for more than 10 years. If you have documents from 2010 translated into Burmese and Karen, you must print the PDF or let us check it, because if you are opening it on a computer and you do not have the font, it will not show accurately. So prior to around 2000, I could have my dates off. It could be earlier than that. At one point, there's a whole article I can share when Burma opened up for a period of time. And Gigi, please chime in if you want to. And I'll keep this short for everybody else because I'm going to wrap this up by 3. But when Burma opened up for a period of time during the Obama administration, the tech companies went in there hard, and Google and Facebook were responsible for basically telling the country, you're going to start using Unicode and you're going to use our Unicode that all the computers can accurately display your characters with. But still, we run into some issues with like InDesign programs. There's more universal, there's a universal text really for Karen and Burmese now. However, you can still, and you can find converters now, which did not exist when I started this job. I mean, at all, in any way, shape, or form for the different fonts. It just wasn't out there. But really, it was the tech giants of the US saying, we're going to change this. And then you can see the difference in what was translated. And it couldn't appear like there was differences in fonts for the internet versus Word. And so when you have all these different programs, they actually do have different fonts for the different languages. Microsoft's font book is not the same as the Adobe font book, is not the same as the Canva font book, is not the same as the Apple font book. And so we have to understand this for all the different languages. But yes, now your Burmese and Karen should be mostly fine. But if you do have older documents, pay attention to that. Thanks, Lisanne. So help me as we finish up. So maybe you're really overwhelmed. It's a lot. Where do I start? I tell people, like, you look at that list of languages on my first few slides, don't try to do everything at once. Okay. Think about your top languages. Again, who's your target audience? Where are you going to get the most bang for your buck? Obviously, I really am a proponent of language access. So I like to see as many languages as possible, and so does Lisanne. But we recognize the reality of your budgets and of the ability to do that. So focus on where you can provide the most information first, see if it goes well, and then to start going down the list of languages from there. And choose your top needs. What are your priority documents? What is your priority messaging? I have a limited budget. Or we have a grant. So this is very common when I'm working with the center program. So I am very used to this. And if I give you a quote and you're like, oh gosh, this is like, we can never do this. Lisanne can attest to the fact that even though it might take me a while, we will work with you. We will look at different options. We will help you consider where you can have the most impact, how you can work within a budget. I only have a PDF. You're going to, I'm going to maybe complain about that when you're not around, but basically we'll have to just charge you for formatting work if it's a complicated PDF. So we can convert PDFs. We have that technology. So if you need that, we can do it. It just might take us more time and it might take more money to do that. Plan long-term. So include interpretation and translation in your yearly budgets for your organization. Start now. Budgeting season, if you don't run on the federal fiscal year like we do, will be coming up for January. So start thinking about it now in the documents you want to prioritize. Oops. And then understanding your quote. So if you receive a quote from us, you might see TEP into a particular language pair at a particular per word price. So translation is odd. It's usually done at per word pricing. Unless the number of words is so low, we charge a flat fee. So this is the translation, editing, and proofreading. That's what that stands for. It's an industry standard that involves 2 linguists. And you might see a DTP or formatting charge if we have to convert PDFs. And if you are using a design program, because it takes extra time because we have to, most translators don't have access to design programs. So we have a translation tool they use that just takes the text from the design program. They translate the text side by side. It exports back into the design program, but then we have to go through and change the font, change the font size, make it look and feel as best as we can, like the English version. We can offer translation only options for certain languages. There's some language pairs, it's maybe not the best option, but we have done this recently for more than one customer because it's better for their budget and it might work. Okay, remember that question about Google Translate. Well, you can apply that to, do I really need TEP for this? Can I get a better rate for my organization? Because it's low visibility. You're providing it for employees so they can do their job better. Our translators are good, but the review process is important if you're going to have brochures done, if you're going to have flyers done. But if you're working on internal documents, you're trying to get general messaging, maybe translation only can be an option for you. If you do contact us, we will provide you with a quote. We will ask for that quote to be signed before we start work. We don't invoice until after. We will send the documents out to the translator. That will go through the editing process after they send it back. If you have a design, like a formatted document, we do send it back to the translators to check after it's been formatted to make sure we didn't miss any of the text. And then we send it off to you. So that's a very simplified version of this particular slide, but I do want you to know the process. If you end up, pricing does vary depending on the language pair. So I think you've understood from today's program that language pair really can make a difference. This is our contact information. Gigi is the translation coordinator. You can email anything to info, but Gigi does focus specifically on most of our individual document translation. She takes care of most of our personal documents. She handles most of our school districts and a lot of our employers. And I do most of our design files, cultural consulting, document guidance and budgeting guidance if you have a grant, voice recordings, and some new customers. So please reach out to us if you have anything that you need translated. We're here as a partner to help you in this community. I really hope that this gave you some more information about the process, about the tools, and about how you can communicate better with your non-native English speakers. So thank you everybody for attending today. I really enjoyed all of you. Since my polling session is inactive, I think somebody is logged in as the center besides myself. Any questions out there? So I had an end poll, but that's okay. If you have other training you'd like to see, please message us as well. Maybe you're a linguist and you're looking for different training, or maybe I mentioned something here today. You're like, oh, we really need cultural awareness training. You can reach out to me as well. Nara, did you have any closing comments or are there any closing questions?
Thank you so much, Shana, for the very fruitful training. That was really interesting. I don't have any comments, but that was really exciting, you know, and I think it would be great if we do anything related to cultural competency, like what you said.
Well, thank you,
In the
Manar,
future.
again, for the opportunity. And we do hope to, at some point in the near future, offer some cultural awareness training at the center. So look out for that. But please reach out to us if you need anything. And thank you all for participating this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.